committee minutes, but I will sign the main committee meeting minutes. Are we content with the amended minutes as shown in the papers? I do need a vote on this, so if you could all show of hands, please. Thank you very much. I have no chair's announcements, so now licensing of taxis and private hire vehicles. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is to inform members of a government consultation on the transfer of responsibility for taxi and private hire licensing from district councils and metropolitan borough councils to local transport authorities, or will be referred to as LTAs, in England, and this is being cited as part of an effort to curb out-of-area working. It is without doubt probably one of the most important consultations regarding taxi licensing for a number of years, and will have sort of quite profound or potential profound impacts on local government and the trade and members of the public. So the background of this is responsibility, as members are all aware, for Hackney carriage drivers, vehicles and private hire drivers, vehicles and operators currently sits with district councils and metropolitan borough councils, approximately 263 of those across the UK. Each has its own licensing policy and conditions, and as I say, there's a split in paragraph 3.1 that sets out how many of those are unitaries, metropolitans and districts. Responsibilities, once we've been issued, drivers' vehicles from outside an authority area may legitimately be used for services in that authority's area. So currently, if you're licensing with us, you can obviously fulfil work across the country, and vice versa, so somebody licensed with another authority. Again, one of the main ones people talk about is Wolverhampton, because they do license a large number of private hire and Hackney carriage vehicles, but those drivers and vehicles can operate in our area as lawfully as they can within the Wolverhampton area. So that's how the sort of current system works. Under the Transport Act 2000, LTAs are responsible for formulating transport policies and publishing them through the local transport plan. East Cambridgeshire District Council falls within the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority LTA, which includes the district councils in Greater Cambridgeshire area, along with Peterborough's unitary authority and the Cambridgeshire County Council. There are 70 LTAs in England in total at present. So the consultation launched on the 8th of January, and it proposes to reduce the number of licensing authorities from 263 to approximately 70. Consultation runs for 12 weeks, closing on the 1st of April. Now, there are questions within it. Set questions 1 to 4 are for local authorities who are responsible for taxi and private hire vehicle licensing to answer. And then you have questions which are for the LTA to answer, then questions for the taxi sector to answer, and then we come down to questions 13, 14 and 15 that are for all respondents to answer. And you'll note questions 1 to 4 really are, talk about cost savings, so any one-off cost to be incurred, any one-off savings to be found, and then ongoing savings or ongoing costs. So that's all about financial impact. And then 13, 14 and 15 are more open questions, inviting answers along the lines of, should all transport authorities be responsible for taxi and private hire vehicle licensing, and why? So these are the open questions. So the consultation is related to, but is separate from a proposed consultation on national minimum standards for the trade following Baroness Casey's investigation into group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse, which is due to be launched this year. I don't have the dates at the moment for when that minimum standards consultation will happen, but it is likely to be taking place in 2026. And we'll be talking about standardising, as it was suggests, minimum standards or national standards, essentially, for drivers and vehicles. As soon as I have more information on that, obviously I'll make members aware. Officers will seek to address questions 1 to 4, obviously with the help of our colleagues in the finance section. and we're looking to obviously draft responses to questions 13 to 15. And we will make the trade aware of this consultation via a circular email to everyone so that they can have their say as well. I think, as I say, it's very important that they have their say and are aware of it. And I do intend to sort of bring the proposed responses to a meeting of the committee on the 18th of March, taking into account any response from members who obviously you're more than welcome to liaise with officers in that intervening period, should you wish to. And then we'll look to obviously submit the formal response by the 1st of April 2026. So the conclusion really is members are just asked to note the content of the report and are invited to submit comments for officers to consider. And the reason for sort of being here, I suppose, and bringing it to your attention in this manner is if there are questions that you have in order to assist you in that, then obviously I'm here to try and answer those questions for you. And I'm so that's the end of my report, so I'm available for questions should be needed.
Thank you, Stuart. Stuart mentioned this to me at the end of our last meeting, and I really felt that this was something that the committee would like to see. I find it very disturbing that once again they are trying to mend something that isn't broken. All our systems are working perfectly well. I have enormous fears about what will happen to the safety of our residents if one central body takes over everything. I'm concerned about what will happen with enforcement. I'm concerned with what will happen with standards. And I'm not sure that the combined authority has the capacity to deal with an enormous amount of taxi drivers. I mean, it is absolutely, in my opinion, absolute madness, absolute madness. So I asked Stuart to bring this to us so that we could all voice our opinions and feedback to Stuart. What really bothers me here is none of these questions are about safety, are about enforcement, or about standards. It's all about money. And that, to me, I find really troubling. So if anybody, sorry for the rant, if anybody has any more questions for Stuart, did they have any questions at all? Councillor Wilson.
If the consultation that goes like you expect the government one to go and they do it anyway, when would it start?
Sorry, Councillor. My feelings on this really is that it won't start until after LGR has been concluded, because in the consultation it talks about obviously where an LTA doesn't exist, they need to kind of look at and see how the LGR aspect of things settles down and what gets incorporated into those new structures, to then see whether the strategic authorities have been created separately or whether they are forming part of those unitaries. So I feel like the timeline on this is likely to be post March 2028. How far beyond that, I don't know. I know they're keen to reform taxi licensing. They cite in the consultation document, they cite about the issue of cross-border hiring, and that this will be a way to resolve that. And I was at a meeting yesterday of my equivalents across Greater Cambridgeshire where we were discussing this, and the general feeling was between us managers that actually it isn't going to solve that. It may lessen it, because obviously you've got 70 boundaries, not 263. But you will still have movement. You will still potentially, and again, we don't know yet because we haven't had the consultation on minimum standards. But if, for instance, Greater Cambridgeshire, when we do move and it goes to the combined authority, and we set a new policy and conditions, and then Suffolk or Norfolk or Lincolnshire or Leicestershire that would obviously sort of border us, suggested that their policy was going to be at a lower standard with potentially lower fees, then you will still get people migrating to that authority. It will just be fewer options rather than being able to just skip across to West Suffolk or to Fenland. They would have to go a bit further, but it won't stop it. That I feel is a bit of a misnomer really with the consultation. Cross-border hiring became more prevalent because of the internet and because of a Deregulation Act 2015, when the boundaries were removed from just subcontracting to operators that were licensed by the same authority. From 2015, that option became you can subcontract to anyone. And as I think I've said in previous meetings, you can also then, that person can subcontract to another operator who can then subcontract it to another operator who eventually could potentially have a Hackney carriage turn up and fulfil your booking. So there are issues, but I don't personally, and this was the opinion of the other managers who were in this meeting, that moving to, 70 LTAs or 70 unitaries is going to remove cross-border. The things that will stop cross-border hiring in a way, or cross-border shopping for licences, is minimum standards that are applied everywhere, or national standards, not even a minimum standard, because you're then still going to have some flexibility in what people want to then go beyond minimum standards. So really there should be a minimum standard that says if you hit this standard you can be a driver, if you hit this standard you can have a vehicle, and that should be the same across England, because as soon as you do that, and as soon as you have a reasonably standardised fee, whether it's a statutory maximum along the lines of the Gambling Act, or whether it's a set fee like the Licensing Act, what you'll do is you'll remove instantly the want and desire for people to go to Leicestershire or to Lincolnshire's LTA, because they're not going to have any benefit there. It will come down to potentially service. But if the idea is in this, and I think this is why some of the financial questions may be being asked, is that if everywhere is well funded and has the staff and the resources, then the delays that are experienced by other authorities in England at the moment shouldn't be the case. And they are there, and they are a problem. Like, we're very fortunate here. We turn around our licenses in about 3 to 4 days. Some authorities, you will be waiting 2 or 3 months to get licenses. And it's not just within the taxi area. We're well aware that even in other areas like Licensing Act, there are some authorities that are severely, resource deficient, and there are massive delays. So the idea, I feel, is that by making the larger authorities, they believe that there can be savings to be had and better resourcing to be had. However, again, just from a day-to-day side of things, the consultation, when you read it, you'll see that it talks about the fact that taxi licensing should be cost neutral, it should be cost recovery, it shouldn't be, so in one respect what they're saying is, well, you can take taxi licensing income and taxi licensing away from a district and put it in the LTA, and it'll have no impact because it's self-funding. It shouldn't have any impact on everything else. Now, what we would say to that is, yes, there are certain things which absolutely should be ring-fenced, and we shouldn't be using taxi licensing as a cash cow to prop up other services of the council, and we don't here. We just don't do that, and you've heard me bang on about that so many times. But what you cannot escape is that every authority has systems, staff, license fees to pay for our Microsoft access, and Uniform, the database we use. And those fees are there, and those fees are currently spread across, so every license holder, whether they're an animal license holder or a taxi license holder, will share some of those generic kind of costs. And also, we don't have specialists. A lot of our staff deal with taxi licensing, and they deal with animals and gambling and all the other scrap metal and all the other types of licensing that we do. So if you were to remove taxi licensing and the income that it generates, what you're left with, in my opinion, and those of my colleagues, is potentially for a service that will no longer be able to cover its costs. Because, for example, the Licensing Act fees are a statutory fee. They were a statutory fee set in 2005. They haven't gone up with inflation, or they haven't gone up, they haven't been looked at, they haven't been changed. And so, you were paying £190 to apply for a pub licence in 2005. 21 years later, you're still paying £190. But the costs of dealing with that from a licensing authority are, hugely more expensive than they used to be. And a lot of the other income, you know, the Gambling Act, they're capped fees, and we're at those maximum caps because we don't have any economies of scale here, because we're not a Skegness, we're not at Hunstanton, where there's a lot more, you know, sort of gambling work and gambling income. So what we fear is that at the moment, whilst we don't make money off taxes, you cannot escape the fact that the taxi income does cover some of those other costs, and you will not have a situation where you can't employ a third of a person. You have to employ a part-time or, or a whole person generally. So, you know, I feel that the general taxpayer will have to contribute more towards the licensing function within the new unitary if taxi licensing is moved to the LTA. You know, that is, I feel like, one of the implications, certainly on a cost point of view. I don't believe there'll be any savings operationally from this. So, as I say, there obviously, as the Chair has alluded to as well, there are other issues regarding the fact that the districts and what will be the unitaries, we're set up and established, and we know how to deal with licensing. When we were talking yesterday in this meeting, we estimated that Greater Cambridgeshire has in the region of 12 to 15,000 drivers and vehicles that would be moved to the LTA. Again, my understanding is that they deal with a small number of strategic transport partners and companies. And as we all have, obviously we have these panels, and a number of the members here sit on the subcommittee panels we have and deal with the issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I don't feel, and again, resourcing can be put in place, and I'm sure things can be set up and resolved over a period of time. But initially, the LTA is not likely to be able to, to deal with the level of work that would be coming their way. And the potential also from a knowledge point of view, that if you are moving people who are potentially in management positions away from the unitary function that still is there, obviously making what is currently at the moment, I think there are 6 of us who look after licensing across Greater Cambridgeshire. If we go the way we believe we're going to, with the 4 districts going into the unitary, that's 4 times the level of work in the other area of licensing. I mean, all of taxi going away. There's only so many staff, so if certain staff are tupied over to the LTA, then there's likely to be, use the term, a brain drain as such, impact as well. And that's another sort of factor to sort of bear in mind. So those are the issues, I think, from an operational point of view, that this has the potential to impact on. For members, obviously, and your constituents and the people you represent, what we have is a situation that in law at the moment, we can remove, sort of, if you've got taxi zones, you can remove them, but you can't create them. And again, the consultation touches on zoning. And it sort of mentions that the guidance may be amended to change this, but again, I would respectfully sort of put forward that actually probably needs to be statutory instruments, at least secondary legislation that would change the law to allow zoning to happen. Now, what happens without zoning? At the moment, Hackney carriages comply for their hire and be hailed that are issued with East Cambs only within the East Cambs district. Again, Fenland can only be in Fenland. Now, if the 4 of us go in, or as I say, this LTA happens, and we have this massive Greater Cambridgeshire area, then we're potentially looking at a position where Hackney carriages can trade over that entire area. Now, again, economics will likely dictate where those people then go to work. And if you were to say, are you going to sit on a rank in a quiet area of that enormous area where you may get 3 or 4 jobs a morning, or are you going to the main business or retail or leisure areas or transport hubs? So you might find that certain areas in the rurals may not be readily serviced by Hackney carriages, certainly. And the private hires are largely going to be running through apps and be bookable in that way. That for many people is not a problem, but obviously for some it may be. Now these are all hypotheticals. We don't know, but they are, I think, things that that can come from a change. And then a change is inevitable. Obviously, we know that. We know LGR's happening. We know that we're going to have these slightly bigger areas anyway. But it's one thing to sort of take what is 4 authorities into one and have that resource all still contained and all the finances all contained, compared to having that huge chunk of every authority's work, because it is, it's 90-odd% of our work now here is taxi related, and in the other areas that are likely to join us, it's still a significant area of their work as well, over 50% of their work, and that would all go to the LTA. That may or may not be able to sort of cope with that work level going across. So again, that's hopefully given a little bit more insight from a day-to-day operational point of view on this. And again, I'm here to answer any questions you may have, which will help you go away and consider what you wish to say. One other question which did come up yesterday is whether we should be looking to put in a response collectively across, with the other authorities such as Fenland, Peterborough, South Cambs, Cambridge City, etc. But that's just thrown in there.
Councillor Goldsack.
Well, in that very long answer to a date request, I think my question was just about answered, but I'll answer it again just to get a slimmed down version. I could see a minor brain drain incident, but my understanding would be that the LTA is the CPCA, so therefore surely 2P would apply, and therefore if there's any staffing issues related here, Hunts, Self, whatever the district is, whatever the setup is, there are other organisations like Suffolk and Norfolk that are going to form their combined authority. We've got our combined authority, so there's a target to where the 2P would operate to and from then thereafter. So I'm interested to understand why we think there would be such a brain drain, or is, are we a little bit scared of it?
Yeah,
I mean that nicely.
I appreciate the question, and I'll hopefully give some more clarification on what I mean by that. As I say, there are currently in the Greater Cambridgeshire area, there are 4 licensing managers, and then 2 other managers who do environmental health and licensing as such. So you've kind of got 4 specialist licensing managers. Now, play the scenario out that as I say, you've got 4 authorities going to one, which is the new Unitary North, let's say, okay, and there will be 4 lots of work, and that will need to be still dealt with. So all of the Gambling Act, all of the animal stuff, all the scrap metal, tobacco and vape licensing, which I'll touch on in the next report, things like that which are on the horizon. So all of that will still need to be dealt with. But then you'll also have, a number of people, and probably looking at the numbers that they'll be dealing with, probably in the region of like 15 to 20 staff will need, in Greater Cambridgeshire, not just talking from here obviously, but in Greater Cambridgeshire, we'll probably need to go across to the LTA under the 2P rules, in order to fully resource that area. Now, again, if Manager X goes across, they are not going to be able to deal with that all on their own. They may well be the manager, but they will then take a senior with them, and perhaps other enforcement people as well. And then you haven't got the manager in that unitary. So therefore, you're then relying on one of the other managers who is in one of the other authorities if they choose to stay within that area. So when I talk about a sort of brain drain, I'm not necessarily talking about saying, well, people aren't going to want to 2P over or anything else like that. What I'm kind of saying is that, we can't be split in 2 places at once. So what you'll find potentially is people in senior positions will go to these new positions, whether they're heads of licensing managers, whatever they may be called. And there is a potential, and this is you know, just generally with the LGR process, there is a potential for people that if a new office for the new unitary is not favourably located for where they are, they are unlikely to want to travel 45 minutes to an hour to get to that office. You know, so with obviously where for instance, if it was the LTA and the LTA offices were in Huntingdon, I can say almost hand on heart, half of my staff would not want to go there. You know, so what we're in a situation is that you've got a finite amount of resource within. Talking to my colleagues, we're all at the point where we've got the absolute bare essentials we need to function. And then you're then moving and setting up this new authority and all of the different things about where the offices will be located. And there is just a concern that, you know, and it's not just within Greater Cambridgeshire. I sit on other panels at more wider, where there are concerns that, you know, that the process of LGR generally across England is going to see a number of people in senior positions who are nearing the end of their careers, look to take you know, early retirement and things like that, you know, not want to move and where they have to then commute X amount of miles. So there are these potentials, and I'm not trying to scaremonger. What I'm trying to just put across is that, you know, that it is a potential. It's a potential of LGR. It's a potential of moving them because it brings an additional dynamic into play when they go to be tupied over.
If I could just come back on that. So in summary, what we're looking at here is the economies of scale from having a single larger taxi licensing thing. What you're suggesting is that could be lost on the remaining licensing issues back at the what are currently district entities.
Yeah, I think it's the districts or the new unitary that will suffer more from this from a local government point of view, because, you know, we're an example here where you know, the fact that 24/7 chose us to be their national licensing authority has obviously brought their income to us, and that, as we've seen in some of the previous reports I've obviously brought forward, has meant that we've been able to lower our fees, you know, because we're not allowed to make money, as you know, we're not allowed to make profit. So everyone in the taxi environment and the taxi world has benefited by those economies of scale that have come in. But as I say, if they go across to the LTA will eventually be very well financed, and it will be covering its costs because that's what it will do, and it will be staffed. But the unitaries left behind may well struggle to cover those costs.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Goodell.
Thank you, Chair. I find this rather a moot point doing all this now when we got LGR happening, because automatically you're going to reduce the number of licensing authorities by having the unitaries. So surely that could be an argument to put this on hold until the LGR's completed within the country, and naturally reduce the number of licensing authorities anyway. So that could be one of the arguments against this.
It's a valid point. It does seem strange timing that we've waited almost a generation or more to have some sort of reform within taxi licensing, and then now we have this, and at a point when also, as I say, there's an imminent consultation on national standards. That if you take LGR and national standards together as a package, with perhaps a national fee as well, a lot of the arguments do disappear. You know, I don't personally feel that, taking school contract work aside, I don't personally feel that transport and private hire work is necessarily strategic. A lot of their ad hoc journeys, etc., etc. Obviously, you know, there is a slight difference with school contract work and the way that ties in with the county council education transport needs. But yeah, it is a strange one, because I do feel that national standards, a national fee, and LGR will resolve most of the issues.
Thank you. Councillor Trapp. Haven't forgotten you.
Number of questions. Can I just make not a comment, but a question about there's taxi licenses which are zoned. There's PHV licenses which are not zoned.
Not zoned, yeah.
And is the send another one, or is it a PHV?
Yeah, so send licensing or send transport rely on private hire. Well, say they rely on private hire. They do use hackney carriages as well, but effectively send work is still just a client being picked up from A to B.
Right.
Okay. But the client is the county council or the education authority that tenders for the route. The taxi trade will say, I will do this route for X amount of pounds and I'll provide a driver and a passenger assistant. The county then badge the driver and the passenger assistant to give them medical and DBS clearance to do their routes. And obviously they have to have a license with us on the driver, the vehicle and the operator. If it's a private hire, they don't need an operator if it's hackney carriage. So send is not a different type of private hire or taxi license. It's essentially a different type of work conducted by hackneys and private hire. Yes.
Microphone, John.
Microphone. Talking about zoning for taxis, is it means that they can only pick up within that zone, but can deliver outside of that zone?
Yeah, exactly. If you're a hackney carriage licensed by East Cambridgeshire District Council, you can be hailed or picked up from one of the ranks,
yeah.
And you can take that passenger to anywhere in the UK. It's just about where you pick the person up from. But equally, hackney carriages can work outside of our area for pre-booked work. They just can't pick up people. They can't be hailed, so they're not available for immediate hire.
They become PHVs in the sense.
Yeah, they become PHVs. So if one of our hackney drivers was sat in Cambridge and you approached them and they said, yeah, jump in, I'll take you. They can't do that. The only way that they are allowed to take that job is if you are booking them. So if you booked it through an app and then you walk up and they go, oh, hi, are you John? Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I got your booking, jump in, not a problem. Has to be pre-booked, but that's the difference.
Right. I think what I gather from what you've said, I think I've gathered, so I want confirmation, that actually, to make licensing viable, all the licensing has to be done together. There's no point in having a taxi license there, which is probably the bulk of the work, even before whatever's Warwickshire came in, or Worcestershire, or whatever. Whereas the licensing for the dogs, scrap metal, isn't actually. It's not not much work, and therefore unit changes in personnel of one unit make a big difference. So you might have work for only one on a third, but how do you do that third?
Exactly. In our areas, within Greater Cambridgeshire areas, and within the 4 authorities that would be in the LGR unitary, the licensing as such is, we don't have specialists. We have generalists. So you don't have somebody just picking up taxi licenses day in, day out, and that's what they do 37 hours of the week. You have people who jump from one application to another and just deal with it in that way. And by way of an example again, those core base costs that are incurred, whether it be facilities, heating, license fees, new computers, printers, or whatever, all these different sort of base costs are currently sort of like, you could argue, spread across, at the moment, nearly 6,000 individuals that we license in some way, shape or form. Now, if taxi licensing was not part of that, that would probably, go down to, in our area, would probably be more like 2,500 licence holders, you know, that would be doing that, maybe less than that actually, you know. So you know, therefore those people remaining will pay a larger percentage or a larger cost in order to cover it, and eventually I feel that you'll get to the point where you know, the costs of running the service, as I say, going back to the fact that, you know, a lot of those are statutory services that have a statutory fee or statutory maximum that haven't changed in over 20 years, you know, you are likely to have somebody like me sat in front of you at year end saying, we haven't covered our costs. It's, you know, we're running at, you know, £100,000 deficit. And that will need to be paid out of the general taxpayer fund. You know, that's I think is a potential with the funding model.
I mean, but it is still a service we have to provide, rather like bins or whatever it is. It may not, bins we don't cover the costs, but yeah.
Yeah,
But I think the argument here is actually whether taking taxi licensing out of the general licensing will actually will increase the costs for the thing. So in terms of, since it's quite important to have savings, it's not actually going to be a saving on a wide scale. And I take Councillor Goodall's point as well, that about the fact that we haven't, you know, we don't know what the LGRs are going to be like, so why do it now? Yeah, I don't know how many LGRs there's going to be. Oh, do you know? So roughly 70 LTAs. Is more or less the same. So
We agree, John, it's nonsense.
but we're not, it's not
Sorry, have you
nonsense,
finished? Sorry. Have you finished? You have, sure. Councillor Inskip, very
Okay,
patiently waiting.
I've got a sort of question, which is, what are we planning to do as an authority to respond, rather than just as individuals? But I do want to make some comments first. And yeah, I share certainly the Chair's concerns about that the consultation is all about cost saving and virtually nothing else. And also, the reason we've got this is because it's in the devolution white paper, but that's like 2 paragraphs in a 118-page document. I just want to go through a few points. So I know there was the concern about the combined authority not having the capacity. I suspect the counter to that is going to be, well, it can build the capacity like it does with other things that it takes on. However, I think there's a strong and important counter to that, which is the combined authority is in the process, or will be, from April, trying to become an EMSA, which is an established mayoral strategic authority. That in itself will bring new responsibilities, a broader scope for the combined authority that they'll need to build the capacity for. So if they're doing that over the next few years, and in areas with taking bus franchising forward, that's another area where they're having to build capacity. If they have to tag on licensing of you know, taxis and private hire vehicles, I suspect that's going to be quite low down on their priority of things that they want, that they're trying to get right, because it's not something they're asking for. It's not like the combined authority is saying give us this role. So I think that's a major concern that we somehow need to reflect, is that this isn't going to be a priority in terms of all the other things that the combined authority is trying to do. I also don't think it fits with effectively the strategic nature of the responsibilities generally that the combined authority does. So I don't think it makes a great deal of sense there. On the cost saving, and I know so other members have touched on this, so we know that we're going to go from you know, effectively 6 authorities, 5 districts and a unitary today with this specific licensing function, to 2, or in the worst case 3. I suspect it's going to be two unitaries. So already you've got that cost saving in terms of going from 6 to 2. And when it's the unitary doing it, as we've already said, it's part of the broader set of licensing responsibilities. So I suspect it's by no means the most cost-effective approach to give this to the combined authority. I suspect once you factor in the changes that will come with the move to the unitary, and if those new unitaries keep a broad licensing function, I suspect that's good an argument to say actually this is going to be a more effective way than giving it to the giving it to the combined authority. The other thing that we've not touched on, and I guess we don't know yet how this is going to be done, but you know, there's mention of the way that it's done in London, and it is the London Authority that licenses private hire vehicles and carriages there. One key difference there is the member involvement or scrutiny. So we know, and we've got it on one of the subcommittee minutes today, that you know, if a driver's fit and proper status is questioned, then they attend a hearing of the relevant subcommittee, and councillors will oversee that. That doesn't happen in London. That's done by Transport for London officers, and if those licensees want to then challenge that, it goes to the Magistrates' Court. There's no involvement from locally elected councillors. So I think that's another key concern that I would have with this change, because I can't see that we're going to have, you know, the big thematic committees and the you know, audit and overview and scrutiny committees at the Combined Authority, and then they put in a licensing subcommittee. I suspect, as part of the change, that member involvement when the driver's status is raised will just disappear, and I think that's another big concern. So going back to my question, are we going to try and put a sort of a view as an authority forward that members have supported, as well as, you know, individually going back? And
I think that's, we could certainly put something together probably as a committee, but I will talk to Anna and see if there's something we want to do as an authority. If you want to talk to Lorna as well and see if there's something we can always sit down and collaboratively to get together to see if we can put our response, because I think your points about there not being any member involvement in terms of, you know, we're just about to have a subcommittee when this finishes over a potential driver safety. That is my main concern, is that how vulnerable are our residents going to be if an officer is just saying yes or no. We have, you know, we have heated debates within these subcommittees about what we should and shouldn't do, as Gareth well knows, you know, because we all have different opinions. But I mean, this is something that has traditionally always been decided by members as a fit and proper person, and I feel it's very sad that that is potentially being taken away. I'll come to you in a second, Mark, but I've got Christine Ambrose-Smith.
Point of clarification, really. We frequently refer to Uber services. Are they the same as private hire? And what involvement do you have with that type of associated organisation?
So the short answer is we don't have any involvement with Uber here. They don't hold an operator license with us. Uber are an online app-based platform that essentially connects a user to an available source of travel. And they obviously have the different vehicles available and everything else like that. But the model that they do is effectively saying, if you have an operator license, a private hire vehicle license, and a private hire driver license, you can come on our app, you can register to be a driver on our app, and then when you're live on the app, we will send bookings through to you as such, and you can accept them or choose not to accept them. But that's all they are. They're a vessel for making and allocating bookings. We don't have an operator license. South Cambridgeshire do, and Cambridge City do. So because of that reason, we have a number of inquiries that come to us and saying, I want to drive for Uber, and we will tell them that they need to go to Cambridge or South Cambs, because they wouldn't have that ability to do that with our license here. But they are not in themselves, they're not obviously a traditional operator, but they are an operator license holder. And they have multiple operator licenses around the UK, so that enables them, when you book on their app here, they might be able to pull somebody from, again, I'll use Wolverhampton, but they could use Wolverhampton, they could use South Cambs, they could use Lincoln City, whoever it may be who wants to do that job, they can do that, because wherever Uber hold an operator license, they can subcontract it to that other authority area.
Can I just come back briefly? So they operate at, would you say, a lower level of service? I was thinking in terms of risk, really. I mean, I remember a few weeks, months, I mentioned in briefing to you that I'd been advised of a Uber driver who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and a photograph was taken because that was perceived as being quite an important thing. And you said, you know, it's not covered. If you were a Hackney driver, for instance, would you be covered? Would you be required to sort of say use a seatbelt?
So with the seatbelt law, if a private hire or Hackney carriage driver is engaged in a journey, the law states they don't have to use their seatbelt. Okay. Now our local policy says they have to. So it would be a policy matter that they're breaching. They wouldn't be breaking the law as such by not having their seatbelt on whilst they're engaged with a passenger on board. And I think the history of that goes back to the fact of, you know, if somebody's in the back of a car and you're wearing a seatbelt, they can yank the seatbelt, incapacitate you, you know, and obviously harm you. So they were told they didn't have to wear seatbelts, and so that's the exemption. But most authorities do have it in their policy that they want to see them wearing seatbelts for safety. Now, obviously, you know, they will also look at their policy and say, well, if there are a lot of incidents where drivers are getting attacked, then we might look at, you know, removing that from the policy. But fortunately, where we are, we've never had any such sort of issues in that way, so we retain it in the policy side. The initial question of Uber and their standards, actually, you know, they're incredibly good. You know, I'm not going to sit here, you know, and say otherwise. They were, you know, a lot of these app-based companies are, and because Uber are not the only one out there. There's Ola and other ones as well, and you know, they were the ones who sort of started to do things like, you know, that you can get a message appears on your phone that tells you the registration number and a photo of the driver, so you know you're getting into a vehicle with a safe driver, etc. So actually, you know, they were almost pioneers in bringing quite a lot of good things. You know, as with any new technology and stuff, there are issues, and the law doesn't always catch up, you know, at the time. But no, they are not in themselves a problem. They have compliance officers, etc. You know, and as I say, they do have a lot of things which actually help public safety, as do a lot of our other operators who have taken that technology and use it for themselves now. And a lot of our local operators do the same thing.
Oh, sorry, could I just come back briefly again? So, could you foresee legislation coming forward so that anybody being paid to drive a person from A to B has to operate under the same, you know, standards, shall I say?
Like, again, I think I'll just draw you back to the consultations that's upcoming. Obviously, at the moment, there's 263 authorities. We all have our own policy. Yeah, you know, there are a lot of similarities in those policies, but there is also a hell of a lot of deviation in those policies as well. Removing from 260 to 70 will do that. As I mentioned in my report, the consultation on minimum standards, I think if that gains traction and the industry want it, officers like myself want it. So if that happens, you know, I think we will see a day where it will not matter where you're getting your license. You will be expected to do an enhanced DBS, a Group 2 medical, you know, safeguard training, and all the other things that they have to do. But it will be the same everywhere. And personally, I can't wait for that to happen, because it will be a game changer.
Thank you.
Councillor Goldsack.
It's just a very quick one. It's following on from what Mark said, which I totally agreed with. And to be fair, Chair, you've supported it. If we're going to have a group response to this, as an administration's response to this, etc., then I feel that we should put something in there about a recommendation that this is towards the end of the LGR process, not at the beginning. I think it's preposterous, and it would be a relative waste of potential savings to run it now, but without knowing what the outcome of other aspects would be. So I just would implore that we make sure that we cover that off in whatever the collective response would be.
I think the two groups together will probably put together a response, and then we'll obviously bring that forward to the committee on March the 18th, if everybody's happy with that. Okay, do we have any other questions for Stuart? Are we happy to note this report, and we will contribute our...
Well, I have another question. What would you do in debate?
We can go into debate, John, if you would like to. More than happy to. If you haven't already... You can do whatever you like, John, this morning.
My gosh. I'm flustered.
Calm down.
No,
Always nice to
I'm
you.
just talking about this. I mean, one of the things I would be saying about this is actually uniformity of standards. Because I met that when I was at the Open University, I was, whatever it is, dealing with applications and hiring and firing. The number of times, I was in Cambridgeshire or East Anglia, there's a number of instances where we would not take on a tutor because we didn't feel they were good enough. But London did, because they actually had a dearth of tutors. We had an abundance of tutors. So the standards were different, and we were surprised they were taken on, having this person already before us as a selection panel. So I think one of the things I would say here is we ought to be looking for standards and this is the most important thing, not the actual what we were doing. Yes.
I really feel quite strongly that this is not the golden bullet I think the government think it's going to be. I think it's going to cause more problems than it would ever solve. And the only thing they're looking at is saving money. They're not looking, as you so rightly say, standards. We're not looking at enforcement. We're not looking at the safety of passengers. And that's what has always and is always the primary focus of this committee, is how safe are our residents. You know, and that's always been our main focus as far as I can see. Councillor Colbert.
Well, I was just going to say, and also the safety of our drivers. You know, it is a much wider issue than just money. Yeah, thank you.
Drivers are residents too, and you know, and it's everybody's collective safety and well-being. It's not just about money. And I think this is not the golden bullet that the government think it's going to be honest with you. But we will put together a collective response. We'll bring it back to committee for everybody to approve. If we could involve all the main character. Is that you, John? Doesn't mean I get to
one
work with
further
you.
question. Actually, to
Oh, it's
Stuart,
another question.
Yes. At the moment, the license fees for taxis are different in each of the 6. And that in a sense reflects their base. Living in Cambridge is more expensive, and therefore taxi driving. So what do you think would happen with the unitary? If it went to a unitary rather than LTA, would that still be a uniform license fee for the whole unitary, or would there be particular? I don't know. I mean, it's.
If it's done right, and I'm sure it will be, the year will be reviewed. The amount of time and cost that has gone into taxi licensing across the new unitary will be taken into account, and a new fee will be created. Now, you know, like when we just started with primate licensing that we've never done before, and we still haven't to date had an application for, we had to kind of arrive at a figure. A best guesstimate, I suppose you would say, and I think when we enter the new world of the unitary LGR system, then what we'll be looking at is how many have we issued, how long has it taken, and obviously you know that new unitary, like I said, by the time we get to there, I think we will have about 6,000 drivers. I feel that you got. With Peterborough, I think they've got a couple of thousand. Hunts have got, I think, 2,000, and then Fenland are around 500 or 600. So you you know, there will be cause to suggest that the fee should be lower than it is. But our fees have already been reduced, as members are aware, because of this greater economy of scale that we've generated. When those 4 go into one, I think there will be cause for further reductions and alignment, because if they go into and further alignment, and arguably if it goes to the LTA, then there will be obviously roughly 12 to 15,000 drivers and vehicles obviously needing to be licensed, and all the operators. Yeah, they will more than likely end up with a fee lower than what we're currently charging, because you've got all of that additional stuff combined in. Now, that is a benefit to the trade. You know, lower fees are a benefit to the trade. Because it's still under the same financial model, which is that whoever administers and enforces taxi licensing cannot generate a revenue profit. It will not be a benefit to the LTA. It will certainly not be a benefit to the unitary that's lost that income. So yeah, the answer is, if it's done right, it will be reviewed on an annual basis, and there's no doubt in my mind it will put the fees down.
Does anybody else have anything to say about this before we note and move on? Right, in which case then I'm happy to note this, and we will come back on March the 18th and produce our response. Now move on to agenda item 6, which is the general licensing update.
Thank you, Chair. I won't keep members long. I know that first item went on a bit longer than we probably thought it would. This is just really we're approaching the end of the financial year, and I think it's sometimes good to sort of look back and see what we've all achieved. So in the full year, 1st of January 2025 to 31st of December 2025, we received and processed 5,708 cases. No, without stating the obvious, that's a substantial increase over the previous year, which was 1,223, and that is entirely down to the increase in taxi work coming into the department. And to cope with that, we've increased from 4 staff to 11 in under a year. It's actually 8 months. So in a period of 8 months, we went from 4 to 11 staff. I think a particular highlight is the fact that 5,500 or 96% of the cases arrived electronically directly into licensing's mailbox. Therefore, this increase was achieved largely with no increased pressure on other areas of the council. They weren't coming in via CRM forms that needed to be looked after by customer services or the digital team. They didn't come in through customer services, by presenting themselves in person. So, it was really minimal impact that we felt would be the case, but obviously, you never can tell until after, but certainly the first 8 months have shown that that's not been an impact. And also, despite all of these adjustments and everything else going on, all of the statutory and discretionary deadlines across all of the licensing types that we deal with have been met. So the service has not suffered in any way, shape or form that we were originally providing, despite this expansion, which I think is a real positive from that. Financially, the licensing authority is on target to recover the direct costs of the service and the corporate charges that are incurred by the service. The latest on that is we're looking at income of 776,000 year to date, and we're on target for around 100 to 150,000 underspend. So there are some refunds because of the way that members agreed to backdate some of the charges, so that because as I keep banging on about, we're not allowed to make any significant underspend. So we feel that we still work ongoing at the moment, but there's probably around 50,000 in refunds that will be given back to the trade who have paid the higher rate before they were lowered. But as I say, even with that refund taken into account, we're still looking to be around 100,000 underspend. Now that is within the realms where we don't have to worry about that. That's the reason why we significantly reduced the fees in November when members agreed to do that. And what we will do is we'll monitor that over the next financial year, and obviously if it continues to be an underspend, then we'll look to bring it to members to suggest lowering the fees further. So we're in a good financial position as a result of all of what we've done over the last year. On the horizon, again, I've mentioned it previously, but the tobacco and vapes bill is currently at the report stage in the House of Lords. It's now expected to receive royal assent in the spring of 2026, The retail licensing scheme contained within that legislation is now likely to sort of commence probably mid to late 2027. It is highly likely that towards the end of this year that we will have work to do regarding systems set up and everything else like that, training, etc., to be in a position. But it is looking like it's going to be a licensing authority function, and it is looking, as I say, that the scheme will be up and running late 2027. Can't say for definite, because, as I say, we haven't even got royal assent yet, but that's certainly where the good money is sitting. So that will all have to be obviously incorporated prior to the LGR, and obviously we will work, because it makes sense to, that we'll work with our counterparts to try and align any policies that we do, so that when LGR happens, we don't have to then realign, you know, more legislation at that point. So that's just one for members to note, and again, I will give an update in the future. And then the Health and Care Act 2022, which was special treatment licensing. So this is talking about extending the current licensing of things like tattooing and acupuncture and ear piercing to incorporate things like Botox injections and other issues that interfere with the person's skin, essentially. Now that has, it's still happening, it's still in the background. There was a consultation exercise held last year, and as I say, there's no official commencement date, but again, from some of the meetings I've gone to, that's likely to be 28, 29, so that will be post LGR. But again, if things develop, I will make members aware of that as we go through. It's important also to state that at the moment, the special treatment licensing at this authority is dealt with by Richard and his team in the commercial section. And that will obviously be a corporate management team decision as to, you know, where it lies in the future. But as I say, the future is likely to be when we're the LGR unitary, not East Cambs. So it's quite a way down the line, but it is around, and every now and then it pops up in the headlines, you know, about what they're looking to do. So it's just so members are aware of that. So as I say, really just members are just asked to really to note the work that we've done. And I just thought before I came in today that I would take another snapshot of what our database is saying. And in the 2 weeks since I produced this particular piece of work, we've put another 370 licenses on in 2 weeks. And that gives you an indication, I think, of the level of work that is coming through the department. I will also point out we have had cause to revoke 10 drivers since this expansion, but that was always going to be a potential impact. You know, when you have 200 drivers for 10 or 15 years, which is what we had, you know, obviously you would have very few revocations because of the numbers. Now we've had 10, but we've had 10 as opposed to, let's say we've got around 2,500 live drivers issued at the moment. So 10 revocations, you know, is not something to be concerned about. We've worked with the operators and we've removed the risk. Some of them were risks regarding DBS and criminal matters, and others were health matters that couldn't be helped, but they were no longer able to continue driving because of those health issues. So we have taken those steps as well. We've had a handful of refusals where people have applied, but they've been found to be on the National Revocation and Refusals Register, which is, I think members are aware from my previous discussions that this is now a database where anyone who's suspended, revoked or refused by an authority is added to that system, and every authority has a duty to check it before they issue a new or a renewal licence. And as a result of that, we have refused a handful of drivers as well. We have had no appeals lodged as a result of that. We've had 2 complaints regarding the actions of our taxi drivers since this expansion happened, and they were just regarding parking. People get very irate about parking on curbs and verges, you know, and they're the ones that we've had specifically from that area. And we've had no issues from other agencies at all, which is good. But what we have had is positive feedback on the fact that we use the QR code that we created the coding to work, and obviously have that on all of our taxi badges and taxi vehicle plates, so people can see live information and see if that driver is still issued or revoked, or, you know, because otherwise it's a dead document. So we've had good feedback about that. But that's all I just wanted to mention, and I'm here if anybody's got any questions at all about the service. I'm here to answer those questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Does anybody have any questions for Stuart? No? In which case then, if we could note the date of the next meeting, which is not 18th of March 2025, but 2026. And also the one in May is also 2026. In which case then, at 206 even. I wasn't around then, John. I'm quite happy then at it. Oh, hang on a second.
Do you want to add the consultation to that one as well?
Oh, yes. We'll add the consultation to the forward agenda for the reforms. So it's the consultation response from the authority response. Thank you, Maggie. In which case then, at 11:06, I'll bring this full meeting to a close. Anybody who's due to attend the subcommittee, could they please stay on? And the rest of you are free to go about your very soggy day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.